The Ukrainian goal at Pokrovsk is simple: kill more Russians than can be recruited by Moscow. That's according to Ukrainian General Syrsky, who today added, quote, "Pokrovsk is a fortress. The situation is difficult, but stable." So let's get into what we know. Speaking earlier with the Kyiv Independent, General Syrsky said, quote, "There are a few places where the Russians managed to get through our defenses, but we know exactly where those are. Of course, we have Plan B and Plan C for all possible situations. So in terms of what Plan A appears to be, kill as many Russians as possible. Make them pay for every square inch, every square foot, every home they take over in the Pokrovsk direction." He said, quote, "Our task is to see that their level of mobilizing people would be equal to or less than the number of losses they sustain. They've been doing these active assault actions for 2 months without any material successes." Now, in terms of what those numbers might actually look like, the GUR reported in August that the Kremlin aimed to enlist 343,000 people in 2025 and was supposedly exceeding their monthly recruitment targets. So that would put the necessary losses for Ukraine to sustain at 35,000 per month. That is a staggering figure. Now, to give you a little context, the largest number I've seen in terms of Russian losses in the Pokrovsk offensive, which has been going on now for about 15 months, but so far in 2025, 86,000 is the highest number I've seen attributed to that, which would be about 9,000 per month. That has probably been ticking up in the last 60 to 90 days, but to get to 35,000 is a staggering number of losses. I would argue probably be the bloodiest few months of fighting that we've seen from the Russians so far in the year, if that number were to be achieved. Now I'm going to go over to a map to give you an idea of the area we're talking about today and provide a little context here. So this is the Pokrovsk pocket. Now, we're seeing a lot of different commentary from Russian channels right now that largely just want this to be over. They wanted to claim success over Pokrovsk months ago. This offensive has been going on for 15 months. All right. Now, the city of Pokrovsk has not had Russian soldiers in it like it is right now for 15 months. This is a relatively new issue that Ukraine is dealing with. For a long time, Russian soldiers weren't even on the outskirts of Pokrovsk. But what we're talking about here is generally viewed as the Pokrovsk offensive. That began with the fall of Avdiivka right here. After Avdiivka fell, the next major city was Pokrovsk, and this is where Russian forces began moving and targeting. We saw almost immediately the city coming under attacks from Russian aircraft, guided bombs, and long-range artillery. This is the hub, the Pokrovsk-Minigrad hub, that has been the focus of Russian offensive operations for 15 months now. It's a long offensive. Now, in speaking about what's going on there in recent days, General Syrsky said that the situation remains under control and that logistics routes into the city have been restored. It's hard to understand exactly what he means by that. Look, every video that we're getting out of Pokrovsk right now shows that vehicles anywhere near that city on both sides, both the Russian and the Ukrainian side, are under heavy drone pressure, getting hit left and right. So logistics routes possibly up here moving through Rodinsky, and we have more on that from the Russian perspective here in a minute, saying we need to capture this city, the Russians do, or else all of this is likely to continue holding on. Syrsky added that the 425th Assault Regiment currently deployed to Pokrovsk is, quote, operating very effectively. In fact, we'll go ahead and play some of the footage released by the 425th in recent days. No doubt they have been clearing out a number of pockets throughout Pokrovsk and Minigrad that the Russians are taking. Now, continuing with General Syrsky and speaking with the New York Post, he said, quote, the situation on the front line is really a tense one, where the enemy is carrying out a strategic offensive operation. They've collected most of the forces, creating domination in an attempt to breach our defensive line to capture the area. He said they continue to show this area on their maps as if it's under their control. This perception that the enemy has practically got everything and they're about to finish it is not true. Now, that perception has spread throughout a lot of Russian media channels and some English-speaking, Russian-leaning media channels as of late as well, suggesting that Pokrovsk has fallen or fell a while ago, or that this encirclement is complete. Now, we've talked about it for quite a while. This entire area here is under heavy drone bombardment. Ukrainian soldiers cannot move through here freely, no doubt, and that's been the case for a long time. But there are still a number of Ukrainian forces here, and every Russian soldier that pushes in, again, looking at this footage released day in and day out by a number of Ukrainian units, it is very precarious for Russian forces to continue pushing. Pokrovsk and Leningrad still hold. There's no more indications today than there were a week, 2-3 weeks ago that either of those are on the verge of falling. The overall situation does not look good for Ukraine. I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist or a military strategist to look at this pocket and say that doesn't look good, no doubt. And long-term, the prospects for Ukraine here are pretty slim. In all likelihood, this will fall to Russian forces, but the day-to-day progress has been minimal, to say the least. Syrsky said that Moscow has sent around 150,000 troops out of the roughly 700,000 on Ukrainian soil in the direction of Pokrovsk, saying that Russia's goal is to encircle Pokrovsk and neighboring towns from the north, south, and east, choking off supply lines and squeezing out any remaining civilians in its latest gambit to seize all of Donetsk. Again, this kind of goes both ways. This cuts both ways. When we see that Ukraine is putting a lot of resources into holding Pokrovsk, people say, why? Why play all of your cards? You know, the Russians see what you're doing, but it goes both ways, and we can see very clearly that Putin's priority right now, the Russian priority right now, is taking Pokrovsk. This little area right here. There are still Russian offensives happening in other areas of the front, but the mass number of forces and resources being committed to this little town is outsized compared to the rest of the war. Now, the spokesperson for the General Staff, Andrei Kovalev, said, quote, in Leningrad, so a little here to the east, the defense forces carried out rotation and evacuation of the wounded. He reported that the units holding the defense of the Leningrad area were supplied with the necessary weapons and ammunition, so they were resupplied, and conducted the rotation of military personnel and evacuated the wounded from the combat zone. He said by a similar scheme, logistics and personnel changes are being organized in Pokrovsk, where combat operations continue. So any sort of rotation of troops here is interesting and challenging, no doubt. Now, before digging into some more detailed updates here from units actually fighting at the front, wanted to give you a quick update on a fundraiser that we kicked off a couple days ago. I'll pull that up here on the screen. This is with Zynga's Paw. Awesome organization. We're picking up interceptor drones for the 429th Separate Regiment Achilles. In fact, just a couple hours ago, we published an interview with two of the interceptor pilots. I'll link that in the description below if you want to check it out. Awesome, those guys took the time to chat with us. So we're at $14,000 right now for a $100,000 goal. The goal, again, is picking up some of these drone interceptors. So these are used to bring down any number of Russian drones. From recon, they do actually intercept FPVs, some of the smaller ones, and of course the larger Shahed drones that are used to strike targets deep inside Ukraine and a number of civilian targets. So we've worked with Zynga's Paw in the past. Awesome organization. I just got notification today that they're shipping out, that they shipped out a couple days ago, some of the gifts from the Azov campaign we did not long ago. So we've got patches, flags, and I think components of down Shaheds going out to some folks from that. And for Achilles, we're working right now on a couple different gifts. It's going to be patches and flags. It will be retro for anybody that already gave. But we're looking at a couple $100 and then I think $1,000 for a signed flag from their unit. So if interested in Able, that campaign is ongoing, linked in the description below. Now turning over to some more detailed updates here provided by the units. The Ukrainian 25th Airborne Brigade, very actively fighting in the Pokrovsk direction, said, quote, Ukrainian forces are holding the defense. Over the week, 236 occupiers have been eliminated and 136 wounded. A tank, 3 armored vehicles, and 23 units of equipment have been destroyed. The Russians conducted 132 assaults, which is 20% more, and is trying to secure positions in multi-story buildings. Our units are preventing this and conducting clearance operations. Now, a quick note on the increase in assaults. There was some reporting in the last 48 hours that there has been a decrease in Russian assaults. And the rationale for that is not that Russia is giving up offensive operations in this area, but that they are trying to move more forces forward. So a lot of the infiltration in Pokrovsk has been 1, 2, 3 Russian soldiers at a time, which is met with these clearance operations by Ukrainian units like GUR, 425th, 92nd, Azov, and others. It sounds like Russia is trying to consolidate right now, rather than continue to push small groups forward. Ukraine is doing their best to try to counter that. The 25th said that the heaviest fighting continues in the northern part of Pokrovsk and in the industrial zone. Infiltration routes, again, what we were talking about with Russia trying to consolidate, are under control. The enemy has limited opportunities to replenish losses. The Russians are shifting efforts to other sectors and trying to advance towards Hryshny. Multi-layer defense and stable logistics allow us to hold the pressure. The defense of Minegrad continues. Let's get the map back up here, in fact, to show you the couple areas they're talking about here. He says the defense of Minegrad continues. Supplies are functioning. Reserves are delivered on time. The enemy from the southeast is destroyed on the approaches, preventing infiltration of the city. The resupply area, Hryshny, right here to the northwest of Pokrovsk, is what they're talking about as well. Now, to get a little more personal opinion there, we turn to Neil Hauer, who just published an article talking with a couple different Ukrainian soldiers here, Psycho, Achilles, and Vova. Psycho, deputy commander near the front, they did not give the unit for each one of these soldiers, said, quote, "There is nothing resembling a front line anymore. It would be better to call it a front zone, where our guys and theirs are mixed all over the place in tiny groups. In some areas, we're in front. In other areas, they are." That is how the situation looks right now in Pokrovsk. Arguably, it's like this in some areas, as other areas as well. Kupiansk probably looks a bit like this right now. But we've got these maps pulled up, and it gives the idea that there's very clean lines and the Russians have moved up to precisely this area and no further, or they're exactly in this red line and not to the east or west. No, they're just scattered throughout the city. So this allows, I think, unfortunately, people kind of skewed in either direction to say there are no Russian forces in this entire area, or Russia has taken this entire area. And I think it paints a very skewed picture of the actual fighting on the ground. He quoted Achilles, a junior officer in the infantry brigade, who said, quote, "The Russians just keep coming. They've been pushing all year, trying to capture territory no matter the cost. Their attacks do not even stop for a day." In fact, we got footage from earlier today showing a little bit of inclement weather, and we saw a number of Russian forces trying to take advantage of that in the fog, pushing forward in buggies and scooters and motorcycles and kind of modified vehicles that are stripped down, that they're just moving as many people as they can to the front however possible. And we've seen a lot of videos where the majority of those troops are killed or wounded a long ways from the front. In terms of the losses, and I want to stress here, the fighting around Pokrovsk, it does appear by all accounts that Ukraine is inflicting heavier losses on the Russians than vice versa. That should not be a surprise. The videos that we're seeing of Russia having to move more and more troops to the front to try to infiltrate through, Ukraine is in a defensive position. It tends to be much more advantageous, especially when you're looking at this situation, which is a relative parity in technology. Right, so yes, Russia has their guided bombs. That's really the exception here. When it comes to volume of drones, it's close enough. Technology of drones, it's close enough to where you would expect the attacking force having to leave cover and move across open terrain to suffer higher casualties than those that are inside of fortified structures and buildings. Vova says, quote, "I've been a commander for 7 months now. In that time, about 2,000 of my guys have passed through the unit. 3/4 of them are no longer here. It's only because they have given their lives that we are sitting here now instead of the Russians." They note that Russian losses are expected in this point to be far worse, saying leaked documents indicate Russia has lost more than 86,000 men from January to September, a figure that Vova agrees with based off of what he has seen. So again, the fighting around Pokrovsk, no surprise to anyone, has been some of the most intense we've seen, arguably since Bakhmut a couple of years ago. Now, the Russian perspective here is actually somewhat similar to what we're hearing from the Ukrainian side. Most channels are just kind of dialing it back. About a week ago, we saw a lot of channels suggesting that this was over, it was done. It was kind of their most recent wave at the fighting is over. And maybe if we say it loud enough, it'll actually be true. Of course, that didn't line up with reality on the ground. Military informant earlier today said, quote, "The enemy continues to concentrate efforts on eliminating the Dobropilya salient. That is this salient here, an area that Russian forces pushed into, again, small groups at a time, a few months ago, and has successfully been cleared out by the Ukrainians. If you look at the green and the blue here, this is area once held by the Russians, since cleared. And right now we've seen a major push in this area that has turned this from red to gray, and contested area to the southwest of Shakov." Military informant says, quote, "It should be understood that although the Dobropilya salient has lost its significance as an individual breakthrough, it is now important for securing the flank of the ongoing offensive in Rodinsky." So a bit down here to the southwest, which is located on the key road leading north from Minegrad. So again, when we're looking at the resupply, the routes in and out of this salient here, Rodensky, right along this road here, and this is what this Russian mill blogger is saying is now becoming the most important aspect of this fight. If they actually want to close this out, they've got to be able to close off supply lines to the north, and a recent Ukrainian counterattack, I should say, really pushed them back from this area. He said the current situation is such that in the Pokrovsk-Minograd area, Minograd is the only place where the Ukrainian armed forces maintain a stable, organized defense. Therefore, regaining control over Rodensky and the road passing through it will allow Ukraine to resume normal supply to the defenders or even withdraw them to the rear using transport. He says serious problems on the salient began after several unsuccessful mechanized assaults aimed at capturing the village of Shakov to unblock supply via a convenient road. And this was the one a couple weeks ago where it was day after day after day. We saw large armored assaults moving in from the southwest and the southeast, trying to take Shakov, clear this off, and allow them to push into the west and the north. Those were largely repelled by the Ukrainian defenders. So military informant says, quote, thus, if the armed forces of Ukraine finally cut off the Dobropilia salient, which it looks like they're getting close here, then not only the success of the ongoing battles for Rodensky will be at risk, but also the possibilities for encircling the Ukrainian grouping in Minograd. So they're starting to step back a little bit, and we've seen this in a lot of other areas where the head-on assault doesn't really work or it takes too long. I mean, I would even argue that we're seeing this in Pokrovsk right now, right? It's been a while since Russian forces, a couple months since Russian forces first entered the southern portion of Pokrovsk, and we're seeing day in and day out with a lot of very clear footage the cost of trying to move through this urban hellscape right now. So what Russia has tried to do elsewhere, and we're probably going to see it here as well, is go around, find other ways to cut this off, like we saw in Avdiivka. Rather than going straight through it, go around it, cut them off. Same thing up here in Minograd, and what military informant is getting at is this section right here near Rodensky is critical to that. If they can't take this, then they're not going to have any real chance of actually cutting off this pocket. That does not mean that this area will never fall. The volume of drones and bombs impacting in that area is staggering. Very, very challenging for Ukraine at baseline to keep up that defense. But the longer they maintain this northern approach to this salient, the longer they'll be able to resupply, move forces and ammunition in, as well as the wounded out, or maybe even all of the soldiers should they choose to evacuate. But that's all we got for now. For those interested, again, we've got the ongoing fundraiser with Achilles. Can't wait to get this thing moving. I'm excited to see some of the footage from those guys about using our interceptors that we help provide to actually bring down some of these Russian drones that are targeting soldiers and or civilians. That's going to be a really proud moment for me. I'm excited to share that with you all. But that's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.